Welcome to the Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Fit, the all-in-one AI-powered corporate wellness platform developed by Vantage Circle.
Great resignation is a trend that took place in the job market where a large amount of employees were leaving their jobs voluntarily. It mostly happened during the COVID pandemic. Along with this, there's another term, quiet quitting. Quiet quitting refers to the situation where an employee delivers the minimum requirement and stop putting extra efforts. It is a more subtle or passive form of employee disengagement and dissatisfaction in the workplace. Hello and welcome to another episode of Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dipshi, and today I have with me the head of HR Business Partners at Turing, Taylor Bradley. Welcome to the show, Taylor.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
We are so glad to have you here today, Taylor. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, anytime. I'm looking forward to talking about some of the topics we have at hand. I think it'll be great for everyone to listen in and learn from.
Amazing. So before moving on to the topic, can you tell us more about your journey and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things when you talk to people in HR is they typically always have a unique story, and I'm not an exception in that case. I started my career actually as a firefighter paramedic for several years, traveling all over the globe. And then I got into talent acquisition, hiring medics, and that started my journey with human resources. Now I've had about a decade of experience in HR and working with and leading people teams. And as you'd mentioned, currently the head of HR Business Partners at Turing. So it's been quite the ride, but one that I absolutely love being a part of. And I guess my tagline is I've been putting out fires in one way or another since 2008.
You have an interesting journey, Taylor. Thanks for sharing it with us. So delving into the topic of today, which is Great Resignation and Quiet Quitting. So what is Great Resignation and quiet quitting, and what factors are contributing to this trend?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So with the Great Resignation, that really took hold in the midst of the pandemic. We initially had, if you look at the Department of Labor numbers, this huge decline in job openings and a separation increases right as the pandemic started. However, there was this pivot about halfway through when folks really started to resign at exponentially higher rates or multi-deviations out from the mean that we had typically seen in the past. So what does that mean is the separations rate during the pandemic started to hit highs. Usually, most people would center it around mid-2021, where about, I'd say, millions and millions of people, more than the average, were leaving their business. Why do I think that started? I think the pandemic, one silver lining throughout this whole fiasco was people really got in tune to what mattered most to them. And oftentimes when they came to that realization on their journey in the workplace, they realized that their current workplace may not be for them. And that could have been for any number of reasons. And that paired with the interest rates being so low, and as they would say in the marketplace, free money was everywhere, businesses were on hiring sprees. So the mobility or the barriers to mobility for the workforce were quite low. And we saw that translate into the number of separations that were happening in the aggregate workforce. And with that, I think you found a more empowered workforce, one that was much more in tune to what they want from a job. And that is what translated into what we would come to call the Great Resignation. So I think that's where the origins of the Great Resignation really came into shape. The last time we've seen anything of that, at least of that minimal magnitude, would have been after the financial crisis, which I think had a very similar J-shaped recovery on the workforce. Is you initially saw a lot of layoffs, a lot of people being involuntarily exited from their job. But then as the economy started to recover, people start to take stock of what mattered most to them and ideally started to switch to a job that was more impactful for what they wanted in their career.
And during the pandemic, the layoffs became very common, right? And with this work from home and remote work culture, I believe many employees even faced isolation and which led to burnout at the end.
Absolutely. There's two parts to that. I think one part is some folks, unfortunately, may have felt that empowerment during this process, or not willing to potentially make a risky move in their career, a perceived risky move. So they stuck at their current job. And we all know frontline workers, predominantly during the pandemic, just had their world flipped upside down. Whether it was a variety of health mandates that were being passed through, people on edge all the time, all of that really compounded these issues where people were feeling burnout. And burnout is not an original story. That's been with us as a workforce for as long as we've been around, right? And I think that's the other thing that came to the forefront during the pandemic, was having a workforce that was much more in tune to the importance of putting mental health as a priority in their lives.
So how has the concept of quiet quitting emerged, and how does it differ from traditional resignations?
Yeah, this has been an interesting phenomenon, primarily brought to light on the likes of TikTok or Facebook, things of that nature, where you have younger generations using this almost in a jovial, sarcastic way to highlight some of their disappointments in the workplace. Now, it's first, I think, important as HR practitioners to look at what is the reality and what is a social media trend. So looking at quiet quitting, I think the younger generations have done a fantastic job at branding that. That's the first time that I think we really had this visceral branding of an issue that's been around in organizations for decades, is people become disengaged with their jobs, and instead of coming forth to resigning, they may let it ride for a while to see how long they can get away with either not working or just putting in less effort than they would. And that's what provides job security to your listeners, to HR practitioners around the world, because again, that's not an original problem, but I think one that's been brought to light more through these social media trends describing quiet quitting. And like with anything on social media, we're drawn to those clickbait headlines where people have been sharing their outlier stories of not being engaged at work and doing all sorts of wild things, like just sitting at the pool and not working and not getting fired. But that's something that certainly has become more of the forefront. And just because it's become more jovial and things on social media does not mean that it's an underlying problem. It's one that's been around for a long time. And it's one that HR practitioners need to be really in tune with in their organization to monitor what is the engagement of staff, not, to be clear, punitive for these folks, but instead reframe that entirely to say, how do I go to my workforce to keep them engaged, to keep them to not want to do these types of things and drive retention of high quality talent in the organization?
And I think one of the key roles of an HR is to ensure employee well-being. So in a company, when all the employees are well emotionally, mentally, so I believe that will generate more productivity. And at the end, if the HRs are also promoting wellness in the workplace, that is going to help, right?
Absolutely. I go back to my days as a firefighter. When we were in the firehouse, we had this saying called me, us, them. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of your team. You have to take care of your team before you can take care of others. And that's something I translate into my career as a people leader in an organization is one, need to take care of my own health and well-being. I just was very fortunate enough to have our second child come into the world a few weeks ago. And so I'm trying to do that work-life balance with bringing Oliver into the world. But it's also something that I emphasize with my team is I don't want them to burn out. I do want them to be at the top of their game. So if they need to have flexibility, either in start times or taking time off, That's something that I always try to drive with the staff that reports into me or within my team. And then finally, the organizations that I've been a part of. I've been very fortunate to work with some top of the line organizations. My current one, which is a remote first organization, we do make it a priority to help leaders identify what burnout looks like and how to mitigate that from becoming a severe issue. But ultimately, when you have high quality talent, you want to keep them engaged. You want to keep them healthy from a mental health perspective and provide an environment where they can thrive.
Engagement and wellness are two of the most important things.
Absolutely. There's absolutely no replacement for having two of those topics truly engaged in the organization.
And what do you think about wellness programs? So do you think if employers and organizations start implementing wellness programs, this will engage the employees, and as well, these programs will keep them healthy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would break it up into 3 parts. So the first part is there's not one size fits all. I do think it's helpful for organizations to look out to what their peer groups are doing to see what is working effectively and how it would work effectively in their organization. The second piece is organizations need to be mindful of they should not be the primary source of mental health for their employees. Employee and having mental health be a priority is something that comes from the individual, right? And so you can provide supplemental tools for them. You can provide an effective workplace for them to thrive in, but also make sure you're giving folks time off. Make sure you're allowing them to have a work-life balance so that they can go find fulfillment and utility elsewhere within their personal lives. And then the final piece here is just be intentional and authentic with it. If you're a part of a startup and you're still trying to identify how you drive revenue for the business and drive job security within the business, that is certainly a core part, right? The relationship between employee and employer is symbiotic. They both have to be healthy for the other one to thrive. And so if you are unable to launch a variety of different programs or large scale programs, be intentional with at least sharing with your staff where you are. Again, the easiest thing to do if you don't have programs is to mitigate burnout by providing that flexibility, providing that time off when it's necessary.
And do you think work-life balance plays a big role? Like with time, the corporate world is changing. So are the expectations of the people, right? So what do you think are the most common expectations of the current workforce regarding work-life balance, remote work, and job flexibility during the Great Resignation?
That's a great question. When it comes to in-office versus remote, as a head of HR business partners at a remote first organization, I get this question a lot. I think it's pretty simple. There's not, similar to the programs we're talking about before, there's not a one size fits all. Each organization needs to determine what's going to be best for the workforce they have and the locations that they operate in. So I'm actually agnostic to remote or in office. But what I think is critical is flexibility. Whichever one you go with, if you want to continue to have folks in the organizations of high quality, you need to provide flexibility to them. Whether that's giving flexibility in start times, or if they need a day off to take, in my case, child to a doctor, providing that flexibility is what's going to drive getting in and retaining high quality talent within your organization. Any organization that's not providing flexibility in either one of those settings is just not going to be able to retain high quality talent. I think that is one of the largest shifts that we've seen in our workforce throughout this period of time. Yes, there's been some regression to the mean as the economy has started to slow down in the United States and other parts of the world, but I still think flexibility is going to be a critical aspect to retaining and recruiting high quality talent.
How are employers responding to the Great Resignation, and what strategies are they employing to retain their workforce?
Yeah, that's something that took off during about mid 2021 when we saw separations, at least
Mm-hmm.
the way that Department of Labor in the United States tracks them really peaked. That's come down significantly. The amount of voluntary separations has started to slow. But during that period of time, you saw organizations really double or in some case triple down, especially if you were in the tech sector, on the types of benefits that they were providing. The wage increases that were going up out there were fairly significant in some parts of especially the tech environment. I think that was one of the knee-jerk reactions to the amount of separations that organizations were seeing. Now that separations are starting to slow down, they're still materially higher, multi-deviations above the average of what we've seen historically since about 2000. But you are starting to see that slow down. But some of the key tenets that are remaining are employers are being flexible now. Employers are really looking at what is effective in their total reward strategy. It's not just about the number of bullet points you can put on your Glassdoor or something like that, but what is the effective utilization rate of the different benefits that you can drive for your employees and what's meaningful to them. And then finally, employees want growth opportunities. That's something that has never changed, but has come to the forefront as team members and organizations have really looked at how do we start to retain these folks. I know at Turing, one of the things that we've looked at really concentrated form has been internal mobility. What is the opportunity to retain by providing different career paths for folks? Some organizations have been doing that for decades. Other organizations are just now starting to make that pivot. Turing's only been around for a few years. We're relatively new in the tech space, but we're trying to create programs and formats that really puts us at the forefront of being one of the best remote first companies in the world.
Companies and organizations should, I believe, need a change in the work environment, and accordingly, they should implement programs and policies which can help the employees and prevent them from quiet quitting and great resignation, right?
Exactly. There's no replacement either for high quality people leaders in your organization. Having great managers, people that know how to keep folks engaged, a diverse set of high quality leadership is going to be what drives organizational success into the next few decades as we go through tremendous change with things such as AI, internationalization of different employee bases and workforces. These are things where great leadership is going to be driving that effective strategies moving forward.
And when it comes to quiet quitting, so do you think there are mental health reasons or psychological reasons behind it?
Of course, this goes back to my days as being a paramedic. I can tell you firsthand that there is no discrimination of mental health when it comes to socioeconomic classes. Mental health impacts us all in a variety of different ways. And that was something that touched me dearly. I had lost a friend to his battle with mental health during the pandemic. He had been a direct report of mine, was working as a medic overseas, and experienced a variety of really challenging wartime environments overseas, came home and really struggled with mental health. And then, of course, passed away during the pandemic. And that to me was just a great reminder of how fragile life can be and how important it is for us to focus on our individual mental health. Where I think younger generations are pivoting away from what we've seen in the past is they are having a deeper appreciation that your mental health and the empowerment of it doesn't solely come from your employer. This is a personal journey, and having a strong social base for yourself, friends, family, support, hobbies outside of work has really become something that's important to our younger generations, including my generation, millennials. So I do think that's a big pivot that we've seen, or at least a realization of what's most important And so anyone that's struggling with mental health that may be listening or knows someone that's struggling with mental health, be open, be honest, and be there to support those folks.
Mm-hmm. Even in workplaces, there can be a counseling cell, right? So if an employee is not feeling well or struggling emotionally, they can go and talk to a counselor to sort those things out, or probably get the support they need.
Yeah, in one of the areas that I've seen encouraging improvement is the redevelopment or the redesign of what an employee assistance program looks like within organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, when I started early in my career, EAP was this, I don't know, vague phone number that you really didn't know who you were going to talk to on the other end. It didn't really seem effective, so it wasn't overly utilized. But now I've seen this big shift. And one thing when I was at Squarespace that we implemented was having apps, mental health apps that were free to our employees to utilize. We had corporate subscriptions. So it wasn't just EAP, but again, providing opportunities, a variety of opportunities to your workforce to help them have mental health support, I think is exceptionally important, whether it be an app or having high quality mental health benefits in your healthcare package. All of those I think are important. But again, the one thing I don't want to miss is there's no supplement for encouraging your employees to find happiness and things outside the walls of work. Make sure you're giving folks time off and things of that nature so they can go be with their friends, family, or their hobbies.
Yes, like you mentioned, there are various wellness platforms out there which provide support, like in the field of mental health or physical wellness. Yes. So, what are some of the signs that often go unnoticed, which can be related to which can be related to employees quietly quitting, and how can employers address those issues proactively?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about early on in the podcast was quiet quitting. I think was just great branding by younger generations on social media, yet has been around for decades. And a couple of the signs that I think it's important for leaders to recognize when it comes to quiet quitting is you first start to see a disengagement, whether that not be exciting to be in meetings, which sometimes meetings aren't exciting. I understand that, but something that seems unusual for someone. They could have been a high performer and all of a sudden they're starting to slow down. Those are great points of intervention to have an open and honest conversation with that individual. I'd encourage managers not to go in and start discussing healthcare things. That's protected. But you can ask an employee, are you doing all right? Is there something I could do to better support you? I see that you're not as engaged recently. These things typically don't get better on their own. And so having that conversation early on will allow a manager to better understand the situation and how that they can provide support. So that disengagement, starting to take unusual amount of time off or time off without actually requesting it is something that can be highlighted within the organization. The other aspects that I do think are important when it comes to identifying this is quality of work starts to suffer, or overall attitude. You start to see someone maybe like lose their temper or be short in meetings. These can all be things that are common with burnout. And if a manager is unsure of what that looks like, remember, we're dealing with people. And so if you had a friend that just started acting unusual, you would notice it. You would see those little signs and symptoms. You would know that that person's acting just a little bit different. So if you see that at work, it's no different. You're dealing with people. Just be a human and ask them if they're doing okay, without going into medical details.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so with this, we almost come to the end of the session. So last but not the least, are there any specific regions or countries experiencing a more significant impact of the Great Resignation, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. So the United States went through that in 2021. If you look at the Department of Labor or the JOLTS surveys that are coming out monthly, you are starting to see separations slow down. And so there is that regression to the mean over time that I do think will incur. And I do think we'll probably get back to normal levels within the next year or so, depending on the macroeconomic conditions. Other areas where you still see this increase in separations, I look at India, which is becoming an emerging power in the world when it comes to STEM professionals. You see a lot or increased mobility still there. And even I would imagine outpacing the US likely at some point with mobility or separations where people are going between jobs because the opportunity continues to grow at an exponential rate. You see a slowdown in China. I believe China just reported their numbers this morning, where youth unemployment, I do believe, is at its highest rate that it's been in quite some time. And so you see those separations increasing. Again, that's tied to that macroeconomic condition. So as we go into the next 2 years, where and how long recessions last will impact that mobility between jobs, those separations that people have. But over time, that will only increase. We go through recessions, we come out of recessions, people find jobs. One thing I would encourage all listeners to do, whether recession or not, is continue to invest in yourself. One of the best ways that you can make yourself recession-proof and provide opportunities for yourself is continue to invest in yourself, whether that's formal education, finding apprenticeships, or going out and getting some additional experience. Continue to invest in yourself, and that will provide you more opportunities in the future to navigate any of these challenging times that we face in the economy.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights. So would you like to share some more valuable suggestions with our listeners?
Sure. I think just a couple of key points to wrap us up here is remember you're dealing with people and you're a person yourself. And so don't let that get in the way of having that human connection, being candid with folks, being open and honest, and remember that there is life outside of work. It's great to provide your full self when you're in the office, when you're in work, or for me, when I log in the morning, give 100% during those periods of time. But also remember, like myself, when I log out for the day, I get to go pick up my daughter from daycare and hang out with my son. So remember that to have that balance in your life. And I do think that makes you be a stronger professional. So please don't forget the human aspect. Always invest in yourself would be my second point. That's how you make yourself more beneficial, not only to your friends and family, but also to your employer and your career growth opportunities. And then finally, recognize there is not one size fits all to every problem that's out there within an organization. Figure out what works best for your business, for your organization, no matter how big or small. It could be 2 people at a startup, and utilize that to really drive results for your team and for your business. Don't simply try to copy and paste. Figure out what works best for you.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us today. I had a great time talking to you on the topic. I hope you had a great time as well. The entire session was very insightful. Hope to connect with you on a different topic this time. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead.
Yes, fantastic session. Happy to be here. And if anyone has any follow-up questions for me, they're always welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yes, sure, we will. So thank you, and hope to connect with you probably on a different topic this time.
That sounds good to me.
Great then. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.